devices into worship mode. We are gathered here, one community together. Let us settle ourselves in this holy moment and open our hearts to learn and unlearn, to share and to receive. And now let us gather together in worship.
Sometimes when Marianne plays such a beautiful piece, I don't want to start talking. I just want to let you enjoy that moment. So sometimes I'm slow to get up because I'm forgetting, but other times I'm just letting you have a moment where you can settle. Thank you so much. So I am preaching today on the separation of church and state through the thoughts and eyes of our founding fathers. So all readings are from presidents. My opening words: the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether one, few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. That is from James Madison.
And before I call up Kinsey to light our chalice for us, I do want to say that because I didn't write it down, it slipped my brain. We do need one more volunteer for downstairs for children. Oh, Andrea is going to volunteer for us. So we're all set. Thank you, everybody. Love how efficient we are about this. All right. I'd like to invite Kinsey to come up and light our chalice for us today. And if you'll join me in our chalice lighting. We light this chalice in deep respect for the mystery and holiness of life, in honor and gratitude for those who have gone before, with love and compassion for those who dwell among us, and with hope and faith for the generations to come. And now if you will rise in body or spirit for our first hymn, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door. It's number 1.
Good morning. Hello, hello. Hi. It is so lovely to see all of you. I am so happy to be here with all of you. My name is Kinsey. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the new director of religious exploration. Today, so I've always called it grown-up church or big church. Do y'all know what I mean whenever I say that? So it's like we go downstairs to children and youth church, and grown-ups stay up here for grown-up church. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Just making sure we're on the same page. Yes, downstairs is a kids area and upstairs is a grown-ups area. You're right. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're right. Technically, there is a playroom over there. So that is usually for kids. But what the grown-ups are talking about in their church service today is about what people who formed this country might think of what's going on today. And that's a pretty big question, right? So we're going to listen to someone who cares a lot about what young people have to say, because this woman was a young person herself when she read a poem at the inauguration of a president. She was a young person herself. And it comes just in time for the end of Black History Month. Her name is Amanda Gorman, and she is a Black woman who was a poet, or who is a poet. She's still a poet. So this book is called Change Sings, a Children's Anthem. If you can't see the pictures from where you're sitting here, don't worry, because where is it? It's on the screen behind me as well. So this is Change. The end. And now we're going to go downstairs to our class.
And this is our invitation to generosity. If you want to give to TUUC online, you can go to our website, tahomauu.com, and I believe the button at the top says Give or Giving. And from there, you'll see a blue Donate button, and it will walk you through the steps you need to help us sustain our congregation. We thank you for your contributions.
There we go. At this time, we'd like to invite you to donate to the church, to participate in the work that we're doing and support all of the many activities that this church is doing. If the ushers would come up and collect. Thank you. All right, and if you will join me in our words of dedication. We dedicate ourselves and our offerings to the work of this congregation, weaving a tapestry of love we call community, both within and beyond these walls. And now, if you will rise in body or spirit for hymn number 124, Be That Guide. And that will be verses 1 and 4 only.
And Marianne's going to play this all the way through because it's tricky. Sometimes when I pick these hymns, it's because I like the words and I do say to myself, will they ever forgive me? We're okay. So, I'm always amazed by what it takes to have church come together. First, we have the courage to gather, just to get out and gather. And we are defying forces that are saying you're insignificant or you don't matter or your welfare is not our concern. It's like we gather and say, yes, it is our concern. So thank you, all of you who made it this morning and all of you who made it out there on Zoom. So before I begin the readings, I wish to point out that I did not correct the male-dominated language at the time. I also want to acknowledge that people who were enslaved at the time and Native Americans and other groups are omitted entirely from the protections of liberties described in this morning's sermon. So my first reading is from George Washington's letter to the Jewish community in 1790. And he says, all possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that tolerance is spoken of as if it was an indulgence of one class of people. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under their own fig tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. We have abundant reason to rejoice that in this land the light of truth and reason has triumphed over the power of bigotry and superstition, and that every person may here worship God according to the dictates in their own heart. In this enlightened age and in this land of equal liberty, it is our boast that a man's religious tenets will not forfeit the protection of the law, nor deprive him of the right of attaining and holding the highest offices that are known in the United States. This one you may have never heard of. This is from the United States Treaty of Tripoli, Article 2, signed in 1796. So the treaty is drawn up to protect merchant ships off the Barbary Coast from pirates. President John Adams approved the treaty after the full Senate had ratified it. The text was broadly distributed in newspapers, with Adams adding an introduction, which I'm going to read just the introduction, not the treaty. But the whole treaty was published. And at the time, Muslims were called Muslimen by those here on the American continent. So when I say Muslimen, it means Muslim. I accept, ratify, and confirm the same of every clause and article within the treaty. As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslim. And as the said states have never entered into any war or act of hostility against the Muslim nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between our countries. So that's John Adams. I loved researching this sermon. I found so much more richness than I knew existed. This sermon was kind of in honor of its President's Day, but also I feel like we need to be filling our toolboxes. So as we are out there having conversations, we can speak from a place of knowledge, So try to just remember one or two things from this sermon this morning. So our founding fathers were fully human. They had many inconsistencies and paradoxes in their personalities and their actions. And of course, many of them held enslaved people. I am preaching about the face of our founding fathers and the separation of church and state because as Unitarian Universalists, it is imperative we know the history. I hope this sermon or history lesson will make you want to learn more. I got interested in this first place by reading So Help Me God, which is written by a Unitarian, about the deism of our forefathers, that their idea of God was God, but not necessarily a Christian God. And they didn't necessarily believe in the divinity of Jesus. I'm also hoping you will consider reading, there's a little primer book that I'll bring in and hopefully we can have it be loaned from the library called The Separation of Church and State by Forest Church. I love that book so much. It's going to be really hard for me to put it in the library, but I'll do it. I'll do it. Or I'll order us a second one. Okay. So this last election season, and I really say the one before that and the one before that, we heard a lot about the United States began as a Christian and God-fearing country. But did it really? The American Revolution was not driven by an anti-religious pathos that kind of speared the French Revolution. It was theirs was an anti-religious going forth because in France, that the king was, ordained by God. And so that was that pairing. But rather it was Jefferson's idea that a creator endowed us with inalienable rights. Liberty and equality coming from nature and nature's God, to quote Jefferson. So many of our founding fathers were deists, believing in a creator, but a creator that kind of went through the cosmos, flinging out star stuff, and just creation began on earth from the flinging of the star stuff. God did not micromanage. God went off to do other things. Therefore, nature and nature's God endowing us with our inalienable rights so that we could think about these things for ourselves. Religious liberty was one of those rights. Forest Church, who wrote the little primer, asserts that today, both the religious right and the secular left are often confused because they can't distinguish between two things. The first one being the universal spiritual values that underlie the American experience of democracy. And secondly, the role assigned to government to advance those same values by protecting freedom of conscience and belief. And belief being religious or non-religious. Humanists get to, belief covers humanist thought. It's imperative to understand that the struggle with the questions of separation in church and state came from two different pillars of thought. Enlightenment values over here, and Christian imperatives that grew out of sort of this evangelical new awakening in the 1700s. So according to Church Together, both these schools of thought brought about a collaboration that established separation of church and state in America. And it'll get filled in as I go along. So these Enlightenment values emphasized freedom of conscience, of our own thought, as both political and philosophical virtues. It stressed freedom from the dictates of organized religion. So just think Inquisition. Freedom from persecution by the church. And Enlightenment values, which were upheld by Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. Those were primarily responsible for drafting our foundational documents. And then New Light or dissident ministers preached a gospel of liberty. So I want to repeat it just because it's important. Enlightenment values over here emphasize freedom of conscience as both political and a philosophical virtue. And it stressed freedom from persecution by organized religion. And then over here, Christian imperatives out of this evangelical movement demanded freedom for religion so that different religions could flourish. They preached a gospel of liberty. But I want to go back before our founding documents to the Pilgrims of Plymouth and the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay. Both came across the ocean to find a place where they could practice their religion freely. I found a great quote from President Howard Taft, who said much later, they came to this country to establish freedom for their religion, not necessarily anyone else's. I remember, of course, they were trying to stamp out Indigenous people and the religions of Indigenous people. So these Puritans became a bit of a problem because of that. And in 1684, King James II from England revoked their charter due to Puritans imposing religious restrictions on Protestants. I'm really impressed that the King of England even cared, right? I mean, I just think there's a whole nother story there. To have their charter reinstated, Puritans had to allow Protestants to worship as they please. And there was actually, Quakers were quite persecuted by Puritans, and there was actually the hanging of a Quaker woman. In 1635, John Winthrop, who's Massachusetts Bay Colony, had Roger Williams, one of my absolute favorite people in history, thrown out of the colony in the middle of winter for being a Baptist and advocating for religious freedom, including religious freedom for Native Americans. Roger Williams would have died, except Native Americans took him in for the winter and then helped him go to Rhode Island. Williams went on to establish Rhode Island with complete religious freedom. William Penn went on to do the same in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So later, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Jefferson and James Madison come into our story. They were entirely committed to religious liberty. Virginia was known for its persecution of Quakers and laws that allowed for the removal of children from parents if the parents were not engaged in the right kind of Christian practices. Jefferson considered the struggle for religious freedom, and I quote, the severest context in which I have ever been engaged. And this can be heard in his testimony before Virginia's legislature. And I want you to really try to remember this little saying because it's so fun. Part of it, not all of it. The legitimate powers, this is Jefferson, the legitimate powers of government extend to such acts only that are injurious to others. But it does me no injury to my neighbor, who might say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. Jefferson goes on in his testimony, millions of innocent men, women, and children since the introduction of Christianity have been tortured, fined, imprisoned, and yet we have not advanced 1 inch toward uniformity. What has been the effect of that coercion? To make 1/2 of the world hypocrites. Jefferson, who most often referred to himself as a Unitarian, didn't believe in the virgin birth or the resurrection. He removed from his personal Bible any references to the virgin birth or the resurrection. And also he removed any reference to miracles by Jesus. He scorned evangelists as ignorance and engaged in ignorance and chicanery. And he considered the Pope, St. Paul, to be a theological charlatan. So he didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, but he did see Jesus as being an exemplar of how to live a life of integrity, and felt Jesus's teachings were a source of ethics, and he valued them above the ancient Greek philosophers. In a letter to his close friend, who was a Universalist, Benjamin Rush, Jefferson writes, "I'm a Christian in only the sense that Jesus wished any one of us to be sincerely attached to his doctrines in preference to all others, ascribing to every human excellence. And I believe that Jesus never claimed any other." It is in our lives and not our words that our religion should be read. So James Madison, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson grew up Episcopalian. As adults, none of the three joined a church. James Madison studied at the School of Theology at Princeton, but he was specifically studying the scriptural and historical relationship between civil and religious freedom. That was his interest. That was why he was there. Washington went on to attend several churches of different denominations, which of course vexed the clergymen involved. He did not take communion in any, and some historians argue he didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus, and that was what led to this not taking communion. Meanwhile, John Adams, a Unitarian, was discussing the direct relationship between the colonists' worries about England infringing on their religious liberty and the urge toward rebellion. So holding the tension of those two things. And a few other just fun facts about the time. It was Virginia's Baptists, not a reluctant James Madison, who spearheaded the drive to supplement the Constitution with a Bill of Rights. It was the Baptist passion for freedom of conscience that led directly to the First Amendment. In the early Republic, even as most Baptists stood on the religious left as champions for church and state separation, so Baptists want church-state separation, the organization of Unitarians felt God should have a place in government. Well, we've had, a few decades and centuries to get ourselves together. And this one I really love. The Monroe Doctrine was above all a moral manifesto, designated to frustrate the ambitions of what was termed at the time the Holy Alliance. It was a European royal ground founded to establish Christ as the cornerstone of international governance. And to halt that drift over into America, he said this will lead to, this is imperialism. We don't want this in the Western Hemisphere. And he invoked the Republican ideals of self-determination and sacred liberty. So that's the Monroe Doctrine in a nutshell. So in regard to placing religious language in our Constitution, when all the debate was over, the Constitution contains only one reference to religion, which is found in Article 6. No religious test shall be required as a qualification to any office or public trust in the United States. And fun fact, there's so many fun facts I ran across during those debates about the Constitution. A New Hampshire delegate spoke out fiercely about the lack of religious test for office as an invitation for Turks, Jews, Roman Catholics, and worse than all of them, a universalist to be president of the United States. Because remember, universalists with all about God is love, there's no hell. You focus on what you're doing right now and stop worrying about that because it will just pull you off track. And of course, the New Hampshire's delegates' worst fears were realized when a few years later, Jefferson, a Unitarian, was elected to the presidency because he couldn't tolerate Unitarians either. Another delegate stated a religious test would make us like England, where every person who holds a public office must either be a saint by law or a hypocrite by practice. They really like that word, you know, the hypocrite word. They were, and I will wrap up the sermon with the words of founding father John Leland, a 23-year-old Baptist minister, in a tract he wrote in 1790 as part of the debates and unending question during the ratification of the Constitution. This John Leland was a brilliant, brilliant thinker about these things. And he says the notion of a Christian commonwealth should be exploded forever. Government should protect every person in thinking and speaking freely and see that one does not abuse the other. The liberty I contend for is more than toleration. I want you guys to really get this. The very idea of toleration is despicable. It supposes that some of us have a preeminence above the rest to grant an indulgence, whereas all should be equally free, Jews, Turks, pagans, and Christians. I hope this service this morning has just percolated an interest in you learning more about these origins of church and state. I will get the book into the borrowing library. I can actually get both of them in. It's so important that we just have a few facts like in our pocket, just right there when we go out to have discussions with others. And let me be clear, we will never heal this nation unless we are having discussions with people we don't agree with. So tuck them in your pocket. But I know it's almost coffee time. So I hope when you find yourself in various places, you get to use this little quote from Jefferson, and I've actually switched it around because I think it's easy to remember, that it neither picks your pocket or breaks your leg if your neighbor believes in 20 gods or no God. Amen. I am forever losing my order of service. No, I've got one. I just cover it with all these other papers. Having an intention. We pause after the service to just take a moment and close your eyes. And think about, is there one thing you could pull out of this message this morning? Or one thing that you might do? I hope the first thing you do is have a good chuckle over coffee. I hope that's the first thing you do. And I know we live in times that are so trying, and I know we feel overwhelmed, and I know it's hard to get out of my chair. It's hard to get off my couch sometimes. It's hard to think about going out there to fight the fight. But others have fought that same fight before us, and I hope that can give us strength that we can bring about better times. Amen. The closing hymn is 295. And before you think bad thoughts, if you were raised in church, you will recognize the tune. And even if you weren't, this tune gets incorporated with other words at various places. So I think you'll at least know the tune. So it's 295 in the gray hymnal. Sing our praises for our journey, pilgrims may we carry on. Searchers in the soul's deep burnings, like our forebears in their time. We seek out the Spirit's wholeness in the endless human quest. Against time, your souls enkindling of the heart that pilgrims know. Find the Spirit always restless, rooted in each mind and heart. Touch and hold that ancient yearning, and link the heart found true. Stand we now upon the threshold, seek futures far unknown. Hearth behind us, wayside hostel, will those who mourn wild roads. Guide we ever their same memories, buried in the minds and hearts. Yeah. So I have closing words from Thomas Jefferson. I was bold in the pursuit of knowledge, never fearing to follow truth and reason to whatever results they led, and bearding every authority which stood in their way.
And if you will join me in our extinguishing words before Reverend Margo extinguishes the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And if you'll rise in body or spirit for our closing blessings.
Great. So